In this video, we're going to take a look at the Duke 209. Let's jump straight to the end with my thoughts on this pen. I got this pen as the first Fude nib that I was trying, so I just went after something very inexpensive, which this pen is. So for that, it worked perfectly. I do find the section to be very slippery to hold onto and way too thin for me. The angle that I tend to write with this pen the most at does cause my hand to cramp while I'm writing. There's nothing really lost in that. I do plan on down the line removing this nib and putting it into another pen to make it more useful because I definitely enjoy using it. Now, initially when I would use this pen, I had a lot of difficulty with the different angles because of how incredibly wide it can write. I've gotten over that in time and by doing a number of sketches with it. So even though it's very thin, I do still wind up using it a bunch, and probably within the next couple months, it's going to be sort of gone. Not, again, for anything bad. It served exactly the purpose that I wanted from it. So the pen itself, not really for me, although I use it a bit more than I really expect. So I guess it is still pretty good. Now that we know how I feel about the Duke 209, let's see how I got to that opinion, starting with the unboxing. The Duke 209 came in a very simple box, like this. The box is very plain and absolutely does what you expect it to do. The pen arrived perfectly safe, and it does, to store away because it's a nice little box, store easily. With the pen out of the box, we need to get to the nib, and as long as it doesn't take 20 turns to uncap it, I'm generally okay. So how many turns does it take to uncap this pen? The Duke 209 is a pull cap. As a pull cap, I find it very useful when I'm out and I'm just doing some sketching with it, or sometimes I use it just as a highlighter, this pen, so the pull cap makes it especially useful when all you want to do is highlight some notes. This gets us to the nib. This pen has a steel Fude nib. I've always felt that the nib and the furnishing on the pen being gold in tone, not material, didn't match the section, which does kind of jump out at you and it looks a little off. Now with that, the nib looks perfectly fine, but it was purchased simply because it's a Fude nib, and they're kind of fun to use. Now, let's ink this pen up. The Duke 209 uses standard international cartridges or converters and holds approximately 0.7 milliliters of ink. The ink for today is Lamy Agate. This pen holds really a normal amount of ink, which for that's not a problem, but this Fude nib uses a lot of ink, which means you're going to empty that converter very quickly. I would prefer to have a Fude nib on a pen with a much larger ink capacity than just a converter, because I found with a page of writing, I was out by the time I was reaching the end. As a habit, I don't normally post my pens, but some people prefer to post pens, and some pens need to be posted to use comfortably. You can post this. It does post very secure. There's an inner collar inside the cap so that you're not really metal on metal. I find that I need to use this one posted because of how thin it is, not its length, but for some reason that little bit extra weight that I get helps with some of the thinness of this pen. But you could use it unposted or posted without any real difficulty. If you enjoy videos like this, then be sure to hit the subscribe button. Now, the important part, the writing sample. This pen isn't short per se, but it's not long enough with how thin it is that I definitely feel the need most of the time I'm using it to have it posted. Not my preference, and it can mar up the end of the finish on the pen itself, which is a design oversight as I see it, but not something that I make a big deal out of with it being such an inexpensive pen that it doesn't bother me. Writing with it is really interesting. It's super smooth because of the way that nib is bent. The way the nib is bent means you really have to pay attention to your writing angle. If you have a much flatter angle, then you're going to get like a 4B in how wide it is, ridiculously wide, which is an advantage to use it as a highlighter. The major time I really use it is in sketching when I'm just out and about. That's where it is exceptionally awesome to use. You can flip it over and get an incredibly tiny line by pointing the nib down as you write. It is a little scratchy at that point, but not horrible. But using the brush side, the fude side, that bent side down, I really enjoy how much I can vary the line, because when you're sketching, those thicker lines do help show what is closer to you. And if you're sketching and you're being especially fast, making it have that, quote, sketchy look, this nib really does take my sketches just a little bit farther than if I was using another pen, because I can get the lines so thick. So that's one of the reasons that I use this pen a great deal, even though it's not my favorite pen to hold. Far from that. Now for something a bit more standard in comparing writing size. I use Namiki Blue to do this. Here's how it compares to a Yovo Extra Fine on the left, a medium in the middle, and a 1.1 stub on the right. As you would expect, with it being a fude nib, it gives incredibly wide lines. Wider than just about any pen you're really going to get a hold of, with the exception of some stubs. And even still, it can tend to write thicker than a bunch of those stubs. The major difference is in the particular writing. Now, if you write in print, I think it would look much better than cursive. But how does this nib compare in writing size to other nibs I've used? Looking at the writing of a Duke 209 with a fude nib that's writing very upright, here it is next to a Mnemosyne Fission with a broad nib, a Noodler's Conrad with a Fountain Pen Revolution broad nib, a TWSBI VAC 700 also with a Fountain Pen Revolution broad nib, a Platinum 3776 with a broad nib, a Sailor Pro Gear Riallo with a broad nib, and a Lamy All-Star with a broad nib. So it isn't a review without some size comparisons. Here it is capped, here it is uncapped, and here it is posted. I've already mentioned that this pen is smaller in the hand because of how thin it is, and that does pose its own problems. As I mentioned, hand cramping while writing. Now, that hand cramping isn't something that I experience when I'm drawing with it. So if you're looking at this pen to draw, you're not going to have that hand cramping issue, so the size isn't such a big deal. At this point, we have a dirty pen, so let's go clean it out. Be sure to check out the next pen review when we take a look at the Diplomat Aero. If you want to be able to support not just my channel, but any reviewer, then when you make a purchase, be sure to tell that retailer where you heard about it. Thanks for watching.